It started like any other day in the quiet neighborhood, but things quickly took a shocking turn. A young boy, no older than 16, was walking home after basketball practice, minding his own business. Out of nowhere, two police officers stopped him, their faces stern and voices sharp. They accused him of being involved in a crime he knew nothing about. Confused and scared, the boy tried to explain, but they weren't interested in listening. They saw his skin color before they saw the truth. The boy, calm but firm, kept saying, "You've got the wrong person," but the officers weren't having it. They handcuffed him right there on the sidewalk, ignoring the growing crowd of onlookers. People began whispering, some recording the incident on their phones, sensing that something wasn't right. Little did those officers know, this boy wasn't just anyone. He came from a family of influence, a family that knew how to stand up for what was right. And his father? Well, let's just say he wasn't someone you'd want to cross, especially not in a situation like this. As the officers led the boy to their squad car, he glanced back at the crowd. His face wasn't full of anger or fear. It was a quiet confidence, a look that said, "This isn't over, asterisk." What happened next? Let's just say those officers were in for the shock of their lives. Stay tuned to see how justice unfolded in the most unexpected way. As the boy sat quietly in the back of the squad car, the officers exchanged smug glances. One of them muttered, "Another one off the streets," as if the boy were nothing more than a problem to be dealt with. The boy stayed calm, his hands still cuffed, but his mind was racing. He knew this wasn't just about him, it was about something much bigger. Back at the station, the officers made a big show of parading him through the hall. Some officers nodded in approval, others looked uneasy, but said nothing. The boy noticed it all. He'd grown up learning how to read people, to stay observant. His father had taught him that, a lesson that suddenly felt more important than ever. Meanwhile, his father was at work when his phone buzzed. It was a video sent by a neighbor who had witnessed the arrest. The father froze as he watched his son being dragged into the squad car, the officer's harsh words clear even in the background noise. He didn't waste a second. With a calm determination, he made a call that would change everything. At the station, the boy remained composed, answering their questions without fear. The officers weren't ready for what was about to happen. They thought they were in control, but the ground beneath their feet was about to shift. The father wasn't just any parent. He had connections, influence, and most importantly, a deep understanding of the justice system. As the boy sat waiting, the officers had no idea the storm that was headed their way. They thought they'd made an easy arrest, but they had no clue they'd just crossed the wrong line. The boy sat in the small, cold interrogation room, his wrists sore from the cuffs. The officers leaned against the door, throwing questions at him in rapid fire. "Where were you last night? Who were you with? Don't lie to us, kid." Their voices carried a tone of accusation, as if they'd already decided he was guilty. The boy met their eyes with quiet strength. He had nothing to hide, but he also knew they weren't interested in the truth. Outside the room, the station buzzed with activity. A junior officer hesitated near the coffee machine, scrolling through his phone. He had come across the video of the boy's arrest. It was already gaining traction online. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him, but speaking up felt risky. He was new, and the culture in the department didn't exactly encourage questioning authority. Meanwhile, the boy's father was making moves. His first call was to an attorney, one of the best in the state. His second was to a journalist he trusted, someone who knew how to bring the truth to light. By the time he reached the station, the wheels of change were already turning. Back in the interrogation room, the boy heard his father's voice echo through the hall. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know who the man was yet, but his tone alone carried weight. The junior officer decided to take a chance. He discreetly pulled the lead detective aside and said, "Sir, I think we should take another look at the footage from last night." But his suggestion was brushed off, leaving him to wonder if anyone here cared about the truth. The tension was thick, and the boy could feel it. He didn't know exactly what his father was planning, but he trusted it would change everything. The sound of the station doors slamming open echoed through the hall, turning heads. The boy's father, dressed in a sharp suit, walked in with a calm but commanding presence. Behind him was the attorney, carrying a briefcase and an expression that said she wasn't here to play games. A murmur spread among the officers as they tried to figure out who this man was. The lead detective stepped out of the interrogation room, his confidence faltering for a split second when he saw them. "We need to talk," the father said firmly, his eyes locking onto the detective. His voice carried a quiet power that made everyone around stop what they were doing. The detective hesitated but nodded, leading them to a conference room. Inside, the father placed his phone on the table and pressed play. It was the video of the arrest, showing the boy's calm demeanor and the officer's aggressive behavior. "This," the father said, "is unacceptable. You've arrested an innocent child without evidence, and I won't stand for it." The detective tried to push back, claiming they had probable cause, but the attorney cut in. Probable cause based on what? His appearance, his skin color. Her tone was sharp, each word cutting through the room like a blade. Outside the room, the boy could hear the rising voices and feel the shift in energy. He didn't know every detail of what his father was saying, but he could tell the officers were rattled. Back at the desk, the junior officer took a deep breath and pulled up the footage from the security cameras. His hands trembled as he watched, realizing the evidence didn't match the accusations. He knew he had to make a choice, and fast. The junior officer hesitated, his finger hovering over the play button on the security footage. He glanced around the room, unsure who to trust. Finally, with a deep breath, he gathered his courage and walked toward the conference room where the boy's father and the attorney were confronting the detective. Just as he stepped inside, the tension in the room grew heavier. All eyes turned to him as he held up a USB drive. "I think you need to see this," he said, his voice shaking slightly. The detective frowned but allowed him to plug the drive into the laptop. The room fell silent as the footage played. It showed a completely different story. A man matching the description of the real suspect running through the same neighborhood, carrying a stolen bag. The timestamp proved the boy wasn't even near the scene when the crime occurred. The boy's father leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of anger and relief. "This," he said, pointing to the screen, "is what you should have been looking at before dragging my son into this." But before anyone could respond, another officer rushed into the room, looking pale. "Detective," she said urgently, "we just got a call. The actual suspect has been apprehended in the next town over." The room went dead silent. The detective's face turned red as he scrambled to save face. "This doesn't change anything," he stammered. "We had reason to detain the boy." But the father wasn't buying it. He stood, his voice calm but firm. "You didn't have a reason. You had a bias. And now you're going to face the consequences of that." The tension was unbearable as the room seemed to hang on the brink of a storm no one could stop. The detective opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the station doors opened again, this time revealing a high-ranking police official. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his expression was a mix of frustration and control. The room fell silent as he walked in, clearly informed about the situation. "I've seen enough," the official said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He turned to the detective. You've made a serious mistake, and it's time to own up to it." The detective tried to explain, stumbling over his words, but the official raised a hand to stop him. "Not another word. This department will not tolerate actions based on prejudice. The evidence is clear. The boy is innocent." He turned to the father, his tone softening. "I deeply apologize for what your son has been through. This should never have happened." Relief washed over the boy as an officer stepped forward to remove the handcuffs. But just as he thought it was over, the father surprised everyone. "An apology isn't enough," he said, his voice steady but unyielding. "This isn't just about my son. It's about the system that allows this to happen in the first place." The official nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "You're right. There will be a full investigation into this incident, and those responsible will be held accountable." As the father and son left the station, the junior officer caught up with them. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have spoken up sooner." The father looked at him, his gaze firm but kind. It's never too late to do the right thing. As they walked out into the evening light, the boy glanced back one last time. He knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight, but for now, justice had been served, at least for him. As the father and son walked away from the station, the cool evening air felt like a release from the tension that had built throughout the day. The boy, though still shaken, was grateful for his father's unwavering support. "I didn't think it would end like this," he admitted quietly. His father placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice calm and reassuring. "It shouldn't have started like this, but what matters is we stood up for what's right. And now we make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Word of the incident spread quickly. The video of the boy's arrest and the subsequent revelations sparked conversations online and in the community. People began calling for changes in the way law enforcement handled similar situations. The father, using his connections and influence, worked to organize a forum where local leaders, police officials, and residents could discuss meaningful reforms. The junior officer, inspired by what he'd witnessed, decided to step forward during the forum. He apologized publicly for not speaking up sooner and vowed to do better in the future. His courage sparked a ripple effect, encouraging others in the department to reflect on their actions. For the boy, life slowly returned to normal, but he carried the experience with him. It shaped his perspective, strengthening his resolve to pursue a future where he could make a difference, whether through activism, law, or simply by living as an example of resilience and dignity. As father and son sat together that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the boy finally smiled. "We didn't just fight back," he said. "We changed something." His father nodded, his eyes full of pride. "And we'll keep changing things, one step at a time."